Okay, let us take our seats and ready ourselves for the next session. Okay. So, good afternoon. We continue, and this session is going to be an hour dedicated to the future of GEO. And we are going to be getting a presentation from the director of the GEO Secretariat, Dr. Gilberto Camara. So it's you now. We will give you half the time that is here or less, and then we take the other time for debates and discussions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and my thanks to the Japanese hosts again for having us in this plenary. I'm going to present the vision that I, as a Secretariat Director, is working with the Secretariat, the work program, the co-chairs, and all of the members of the flagships initiatives to build together for the future of GEOs. So this is ongoing work, but it shows certain directions which make the bulk of my proposed tenure as Secretariat Director. I'd like to go back to where we are as a planet. I think there is no doubt that we are facing, each one of us, and our civilization, our countries, and the future generations are facing huge amount of uncertainty about what is going to happen to our planet. We have a growing population, projected to go to 9.4 billion people. We have, this growing population is growing also in terms of consumption, in terms of food, water, and energy. And at the same time, we need to avoid climate change because the emissions profile that we are having will take us to an unsustainable planet. And we have lost much of the world's biodiversity. I don't think I can overestimate. And like I said, someday I'm going to talk to my grandchildren and try to say what I try to do. And I hope you can be also proud of what you did in talking to your grandchildren 20, 30 years from now. One of the difficulties that we have in GEO is that on the issues of global change, the landscape is crowded. There are a huge amount of institutions, and I'm just taking just what fits in this slide, and I'm just mentioning those which are participating organizations in GEO, so I'm not going very far. You have GCOS, GFCS, UNGGIM, Sustainable Development Solutions Network, WRI, Global Partner for Sustainable Development Data, GOOS, GBIF, and Conservation International. So sometimes I joke that I see some documents from these organizations, and I joke that if I take the cover and the last page and put GEO, I could issue them as a GEO document. So a lot of the aims of these organizations are very close to ours. So if we don't put ourselves on a road which is unique, we're going to not be able to certainly fulfill an expectation that has put us in when we established GEO. So the vision that is being put forward, there is a differentiator in GEO and the other organizations. And this differentiation comes back to the original mission of GEO. The original mission of GEO, which still stands, is to build the global Earth observation system of systems to provide global information as a basis for sound decision making. And the fact that a system of systems is mentioned in the very early birth of GEO puts us in a different front. GEO is an information technology enabler, because we're discussing that we have a system of systems, and this already puts us in a hopefully different footing from the other similar organizations by putting ourselves squarely on the information technology front. Not only, but an important part of GEO is the fact that we have a mandate that includes information technology, which is symbolized by GEOs. You know how GEO works. We have data, we have community working, which does analysis, and hopefully contribute to the agreements of Paris, Sendai, and Agenda 2030, SDNs, and other agreements, LDN, and other international agreements, conventional biological diversity, and so on. Now, one of the things that is important for us to remember is that since a lot of GEO members and the principals come from space agencies, not always they make the difference between the two types of space data in GEO. They tend to conflate them together. One of the types of data is physical measures taken by sensors of the planet. There is no doubt, they are completely objective. You know, if you have a satellite that measures sea surface temperature, there are no two interpretations of its data. The same for ozone depletion, precipitation. When you get to measures of human actions, such as deforestation, food production, urban expansion, Earth observation is an indirect enabler, not a direct one. You don't measure deforestation by satellite, you measure signals. And therefore, there's a huge amount of, let's say, local decision on what to do with the satellite data. And I'll come back to it later, because one of the issues, so this is what we have to do. But then, what is our working model? How do we face these challenges? So I have been trying to ask you to avoid, as much as you can, the term voluntary to describe GEOs. Because the term voluntary has a lot of names and a lot of interpretations. And when I was preparing this presentation, I came to think, what is the closest model that exists in information technology that is close to the working model? Things which are cooperative. Wikipedia is an interesting example where people cooperate to do it together. OpenStreetMap, it's also an interesting example that has some similarities. Linux. And the literature on information technology has now coalesced around the fact that these are not voluntary systems in the strict sense. They are what is called commons-based peer production. What do they mean by this? All that you produce goes to a commons, so which is shared with everyone. Peer production with what? Because it's subject working with your peers. So if you write a Wikipedia page which is not correct, someone may correct it. So in other words, you search collectively for the truth or for the advance by relying on the fact that the peers can and will, in the case of Linux Wikipedia in OpenStreetMap, either do something correctly or correct errors that they might find. So this is the preferred. It's a full mouthful, but it's better as a model than a volunteer. And because this is better as a model, it fits better in the dilemma we have, which we just discussed here, the SDGs, Sendai, and Paris. Because those who have most access to Earth observation data are not necessarily those who get to decide. One of the important takes that we had yesterday, from the SDG discussion was the fact that Earth observation is much more fit to the telling how change happens and showing how change occurs and when change occurs than producing an SDG indicator per se. So sometimes if you just try to produce SDG indicators, there's nothing wrong with that. We forget that the strongest component of Earth observation is to get the history of change and can show what is happening to the decision makers in a way that brings to their attention. And images bring much to the attention than Excel spreadsheets. So in this sense, we have to split for sustainable development between what we call knowledge and what we call action. Knowledge is what this room here has. You know, knowledge is the understanding, either from a physical point of view, let's say a land use change, an ecological point of view, about the limits of the planet. But action is taken by those that decide how to use the planet's resources. And if knowledge and action are not together, it's going to be very hard to reach those that decide. So there is a challenge, number one, for GEO, because we come from a culture, many of us, not all of us, we come from a culture culture of reliable knowledge. What is the culture of reliable knowledge? We investigate something, we produce a paper, this paper gets into the literature, and after it gets to the literature, it communicates the discoveries to society. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, this is how the IPCC works, by reviewing the literature. But this does not necessarily mean that this knowledge is socially robust, because it's not necessarily co-designed with stakeholders. It's not necessarily replicable. It's not necessarily transdisciplinary. So for sustainable development, besides having reliable knowledge, we need to produce knowledge which is reusable, which we produce a result someone else can do. And this is necessary if we are to put knowledge and action together. Now, let's look at the GEO Work Program. GEO Work Program, and these are some initiatives of the GEO Work Program. So all of them, or at least most of them, we've been talking to some of them, and they have come, if you look at a typical GEO Work Program initiative, it has brought together a number of interested stakeholders from the member states of GEO, a number of researchers, and a certain amount of methods. And typically it has reached the level of some prototypes in let's say 2, 3, 4, 5, 10. And then the person tells, if I only had 100 times the money I have, I would go global. Right, but you cannot have 100 times the money each of these initiatives has now for GEO to succeed. So there is a problem. We have a problem of scalability. A lot of our initiatives are serious. People are doing their work with the best of their capacity, and yet they sometimes don't have a plan to go global. And this is really the sticking point of the success of GEO, is that how do we go global? So the original, what I call well-intentioned approach to do this was the assumption that by having Earth observation data, some volunteer scientists in the north, and producing some operational products, and then making some capacity buildings, you would achieve that. That's unfeasible. That's the 100-time story, that you do capacity building in 3 countries, and you like to do capacity building in 100 countries, so you need 100 times more money. That's unfeasible. And again, it does not empower those who will take the decision. So the approach, I'm happy to report that the new capacity building work group in GEO is looking at this in a completely different manner, which is institutions are the key. So institutions are those in the south or in the north that through co-design and co-production make best use of Earth observation data to design the products and the results that they need, which in this case becomes socially robust. So it's not sufficient that Finland does a wonderful map of deforestation in the Amazon if this map is not trusted by the Brazilian government. And this goes on. You need a level of trust to be able to act upon the results, the decisions that you have. So again, the second reason for GEO is how do you move from the current model of a few scientists in the north doing good research and trying to do capacity building to a model where there's co-design and co-production with the north and south. There is a lot of reason for hope. The reasons for hope is that the world is changing. The world has changed more in our lifetimes than ever before in terms of people. In the past 30 years, we have taken 1.1 billion people out of poverty. This is no small feat. It's generated a huge amount of tension, but in the general idea, this is a good thing. So now this is an important graph that is produced by the World Bank, which shows how the world is getting more educated. So the graph shows the following. So you have in the horizontal the years since 1970, and in the vertical the percentage of the age group from 19 to 25 that is now undergoing some kind of tertiary education. So tertiary education meaning university, community colleges, and so on. So in North America, you'd have something like close to 80%. Europe and Central Asia, something close to 60%. Latin America and Caribbean, 40%. East Asia reaching 40% soon. South Asia already 20%. But you have to remember that East Asia has 1.3, 1.4 billion people, and South Asia has another billion people. So 20% of a billion is a lot. Even if a small percentage, so I make the following calculation, just taking China, for example. If you have a billion people in China and you have 100 million on this age group, so 40% of 100 million is 40 million. So if 1% of these are absolutely genial, bright students, 1% is a good mark, you have 400,000 brilliant people at this moment at the university in China. And the same calculation we do for India, and same calculation we do for Latin America. So in the long run, one barrier that justified the idea of the North doing capacity building in the South is being eroded. So this is very important because some of the assumptions that we had can be turned upside down. The other thing that has turned everything upside down is the new digital economy. So the new digital economy is completely different from what we had before. The new digital economy is an economy where you have a few companies having a lot of data, a lot meaning a lot, really a lot as you can, making this data available at a very low access cost, enriching a massive use. You all have, everybody here, of course, has used it. Maps, for example, the app that you have to tell the driver where to get to the International Conference Center, you show him a map how to get there. And this model has proven to be a winning model. There is no going back. So you have companies like Google, Twitter, Facebook, Spotify, Netflix. They may need regulation. I'm not claiming that, saying that they don't need regulation. But the regulation would not change the model. And I contend this is the model that we have to take up for GEO. Not necessarily with those companies, but generically, this is the model that best fits how GEO should operate. A few places have a lot of data, provide this data at a very, very low access cost, and enable massive use. An example, Google Earth Engine. I have no problem, I gain no money from Google, but I have to admit that this is a game changer, complete game changer. Google Earth Engine is now a global enabler. Look at scholar.google and see who's doing papers with Google Earth Engine. Everybody from India to Thailand to the Philippines to Brazil to the United States to Europe. More than 2,000 papers as I last listed. What has happened? Google has applied this model to Earth observation data. And it showed that it can be a global enabler. So what did it do? It lowered the entry cost to big Earth observation data analysis. Of course, Google is not magic and it's not, a savior, because there are no decisions on which data goes there. There's no long-term guarantee. But I'm telling, the model is here. And it has a consequence. In the same way that my daughter does not remember, cannot imagine a world without the internet. This has changed the perception of the Global South. The Global South that never had landlines only went to mobiles. The Global South will only use Earth observation, which is free at the point of access. Free at the point of access, that doesn't mean free. Someone needs to pay for it. In Google, you pay for it with your data. You pay for it with the fact that I'm speaking about Google right now. It's a huge boost to their credibility. So Google is not interested in charging for that. It's interested that the Director of Geo-Secretariat addresses the GEO Plenary and talks about Google. Now, how do we make a digital economy model, a digital economy effect for Earth observation that is not linked only to Google? This is a challenge, because this is the model. So you could imagine that now the knowledge is becoming easier to share because we have the cloud. So the cloud, using of the cloud system, makes a huge amount of difference, and this difference is captured by vision. So what does the global community need in this new digital economy model? It's quite simple. Imagine how Google operates and imagine an open source version of it. So what you have, let's take from my left side, the left side of yours, a lot of data already being made available by programs like Landsat and Copernicus, cloud architectures that archive this data, which there are both proprietary and open ones, and giving the ability for an expert on the South to use these cloud architectures in a very easy way, using some scripting language, which can be readily shared. There is a problem here that to use this multi-satellite data, the big data, you have to solve the problem, which is unsolved, of in situ observations. So GEO, trying to be an enabler, looked at this. Okay, there is a lot of satellite data which is being provided. Good. There are cloud architectures which are imagined. Good. Is there a framework for reusable shared knowledge? No. So this is a point for GEO to act. Is there a shared environment for in situ data? No. This is another point for GEO to act. But suppose we have these blocks in place. Then GEO glows, GEO, GFOI, GEO wetlands. All of these initiatives could go global. Because if the data they need is on a cloud and the algorithms they use are shared, all countries could use the results which are developed by these initiatives. So the solution to go global is to adopt the digital economy model. So if we adopt the digital economy model, GEO can go global. And I stress that it's not only Google. Copernicus has done a magnificent job in its climate data store. It is as good as Google for meteorological and climatological data. You can use it. It's fantastic. Great work by ECMWF and with support from the Commission. Obviously, you heard a very good presentation from Stuart this morning about how the Open Data Cube is enabling a lot of countries. It was very convincing. If you're not convinced with that, I am, and he was showing things that he could develop things in Australia and move it to Tanzania in one go. Could you imagine that 10 years, at least 3 years ago? The effect that you have the same architecture, that you can lift the software from one place to another. This is a game changer at an open. So we need not fear Google because we have alternatives. And the only thing we need to complement initiatives such as Open Data Cube is to think about how do we deal with in situ data. Because in situ data is local. There is no data set of global that you can use everywhere. Definitions of concepts that we have in our mind do not necessarily coincide with signals that come out of the satellites. This is what I call Ecologies' revenge on machine learning. Ecologies' revenge meaning that both of these, this is a forest. So one is a wet forest and the other one is a dry forest. But of course, satellites see this quite differently. And they are different in each part of the world. So work, for example, that I'm doing in the Cerrado, Brazil, I'm having 65,000 samples to be able to run a machine learning model. And that's to be expected. How does the machine learn without samples? So the more big data you have, the more in situ data you need. Therefore, building an in situ, well, more than one in situ data repository for GEO is a condition for GEO to go global. And this in situ data cloud needs to be public, open. It cannot run on Google. And therefore, we are asking, and of course we'll be in the next months to come, actively interacting with the major or the global players to look for solutions by which we can build an in situ repository which is open and guaranteed access and not linked to, let's say, a commercial provider. The other advantage we have is there is very little hidden knowledge in Earth observation. So a lot of the algorithms that are being developed, they're open source, they're open knowledge. So it makes, we have a culture of open knowledge in the community. So it makes scaling, so there are no limits, let's say no open knowledge limits on scaling. Scaling becomes easy from the knowledge point of view as long as you have a mechanism for sharing. So one examples that you have shown today by Stuart was that you can share what we call executable papers, and you could have a database of reusable reports and executable papers that you could share among the community. So if I have a new algorithm for forest monitoring, I could easily share and be reproduced by other institutions. So I have a repository where my knowledge is shared and becomes global. So this is what we are looking, this is what we talk about the results-oriented GEOs, is going global, enabling what is currently a lot of fantastic effort by the community to scale up globally and to have a huge amount of takers in all parts of the world. Well, this is the plan that we have. You know, scale up what we do, use the latest information technologies, and build what we call reusable and socially robust knowledge. So the idea now is move from a metadata hub to a knowledge hub. Knowledge hub, as I define it, is a trusted, reproducible, and robust guidance of the best use of Earth observation data for decision makers. And this is becoming possible with the dissemination of both private and public solutions. And we're trying to make this go by doing a contribution. So if you want, we were approached by Amazon, and they offered us $1.5 million in credits, not money, credits for use their services. And we are launching next week a call for proposals, which privileges the use of Copernicus data, because we think Copernicus data is quite important, and where the Secretariat is going to support the Global South to engage with Sentinel data, analysis-ready data. This is for the Global South. So the call is limited to governments and research institutions from middle and low-income countries. It's a competitive call. Proposals should be submitted to GEO with a maximum grant value of $100,000 over 3 years. This is non-binding, non-exclusive, no obligation to anyone, no exchange of money, and where all data that is produced is going to be free and open. We have approached the group that does Digital Earth Africa, and they considered this could be a major way forward for implementing a Digital Earth Africa, because Digital Earth Africa relies on the data, on open data cubes, and open data cubes can run on Amazon machines. Now, there's no binding from GEO. GEO is open to other proposals from the private sector. This is a way to make things going. This is a way to have our countries really move into the new digital economy. So we're making good our vision. So this is what I wanted to propose to you, because our aim in the long run is to build and share knowledge for a sustainable planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary Director. We're going to open the floor for comments, discussions, questions, and any other thing that you want to put here into this discussion to enrich the process.
I think we could open the lights so we can see the people in the room, right?
Yes.
It would be better to dim a little bit the lights here, and so that we can see you, and not only you can see us. Because this feels like a theater, a no theater.
That looks
Oh,
much
better.
better. I see and recognize China.
Yes, Mr. Chairs. I have a question to the Director. Throughout the course, we have been hearing mostly Earth observation. But indeed, there are a few presentations also mentioned about the needs for communication satellite, positioning satellite, and integrated use of the remote sensing, communication, positioning satellite, as well as those information from space, airborne, ground observation. What is your visions about the GEO's future in terms of integrated use of various systems rather than various Earth observation systems? Thank you.
Maybe just to clarify, you mentioned communication satellite and positioning satellites as well as Earth observation? Just to understand my point. Well, if we look at the landscape, if I understood your question, we have now, let's say, the task that was given for GEO since the beginning did not include the communication satellite and did not include the positioning satellite. I remember that we all have discussed the strict definition of Earth observation in the sense that you have a sensor measuring some physical property of the atmosphere of the land. And the other thing that the communication satellites are now fully on the provision of the commercial sector. So it makes it, whilst the remote sensing Earth observation satellites are much more on the provision of the public sector. Therefore, okay, there is of course private Earth observation, but there's a lot of public Earth observation. So, I would argue that the mandate we have is to stick to the traditional remote sensing satellites and their use. But obviously this is more a question for the plenary and the executive committee to task the Secretary Director to act in a different direction. But I'm trying to fulfill the task that you have given me.
Okay. Just looking around to see if there's more questions or comments, or it's the European Commission.
Yeah, thank you. And speaking on behalf of the European Commission, I want to firstly underline the gratitude to Gilberto for the work that he's done on developing a new strategy for the GEOS, and understanding that his presentation today is very much a sort of progress report so that plenary can understand a little bit the sort of work in progress that is being developed rather than, I think, yet the finished and final polished product on which I'm sure Gilberto would agree with all of us that further consultation and discussion with the community and different stakeholders through also the relevant geo-governance structures will be necessary. And in particular, the point that I would underline is that, while I see very clearly the objective that he's projecting with this new vision, which I share, which is to have a system where the data and information that we are producing is available and fit for purpose for users and decision makers. I think it's important also that as we take this discussion forward, we build on what already exists rather than just starting again from scratch. And in particular, that the valuable capabilities of the GS broker system need also to be factored into the discussion. So just to reassure the Secretary Director of our collective support for the further development of this vision, and that we're all eager to continue to work closely with him as his thinking develops. Thank you.
Okay, I think it's point taken, and of course, just to note that the GEO Secretariat has the deepest respect for the technical skills and capabilities of the team that is being put forward by ESA, JRC, and Italy CNR. And the team has shown beyond any reasonable doubt to be a capable team, capable of fulfilling tasks that we have. So it's a mark of respect by the team, where we need to work on this as on a basically improvement basis or smooth basis rather than any rupture that can cause, it's unnecessary, first of all, if we can move in a concerted way. And I think we can move in a concerted way. I think the Commission has been quite supportive of moving everything in smoothly, and the Secretariat is trying to move as smoothly as we can. Right.
Okay, so I don't seem to see any Japan. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So regarding expert advisory group, in this document 8.1, 2 Japanese experts participate in this group. Japan will contribute to EAG activity and also program board activity. And Japan recommends that EAG should sufficiently cooperate with program board for reflecting the result of the expert advisory group in the next GEO work program. Thank you.
And also, we would like to support the co-chair EU's opinion.
Okay. I think in the case of Japan, it's interesting to note that the work which is being done by the iCharm team and the Japan DS is, to me, one of the models of how to go forward. The iCharm and Japan DS, Professor Koike, has achieved a level of co-design with a lot of constituencies in many countries, which they use the iCharm system for disaster monitoring and drought monitoring. And I was extremely pleased and surprised to meet here in Kyoto one person from my city in the northeast of Brazil, who happens to work at the Meteorological Center for Drought Monitoring there, who is working with Professor Koike to work with iCharm for drought monitoring. So the iCharm system is proven to be a model that, of course, needs continued support from the Japanese government, needless to say, but it's a model that has been, one thing it's important, that has been shown that can be scaled up. This is the important thing. The vision that was put by Professor Koike, which I think is absolutely the correct one, was design something that you can scale up, that you can go to Myanmar, to the Philippines, to Brazil, and you can support these countries. So this is a real, this is the kind of attitude that will take us forward, is systems designed to be scalable, and not systems designed to to give examples, 1 or 2 examples, which are best practices, but are not necessarily scalable. So the iCharm is a very great example of the future of GEO.
China?
Okay, we're glad to see, we are talking about the transfer from data sharing to knowledge sharing. And I would like to know, this will lead to not just like internet library, we are going to something like virtual, environment. We can do not only sharing data, actually implement a different kind of knowledge there. I would like to know, is there any specific timetable or some kind of a program we are moved toward to these targets in the future, right? Probably we do have like a virtual city, virtual globe. We are not only sharing data like Google's, we also implement our knowledge. For example, there's an earthquake there, and not just highlight the word earthquake, about the different energy transfer caused tsunamis. People can also see from this kind of internet-based, but also 3D and the virtual, not only data, their process, geo process could be presented in this kind of virtual laboratory, I should say, not just a library. It's something we are moved to this direction.
Right. The way we operate is not by necessarily building a geo system that sits in Geneva and is shared by the world. We think a better model is to, let's say, encouraging countries to do what the Australians have done, what the Europeans have done, to build their system, what iCharm has done, to build their systems and share them with others. What we have to do, and I think the job of the GEO Secretariat, is to point to the future and say, this is the only option we have if we are going to go global with Earth observation. In other words, you don't count your success with the number of downloads you have. So ideally, if you have a satellite, you say, oh, I had 2 million downloads, 3 million downloads, 10 million downloads. Maybe the best success is having 0 downloads. 0 downloads may be best success than 3 million downloads. In other words, 0 downloads means that you don't, you share your data without needing for download. So in other words, if China builds a data cube which is accessible by others, we can only be extremely happy. So it's the same thing that we say, this is the future, and this is the future because there's no other way. The train is out of the station. We are, our daughters are, using Facebook, Google, and everything. This is the model of the digital economy. If we adopt this model wholeheartedly, if we take this model as the model for moving geo globally, then we have a chance of making an impact. But if we don't, if we stay prisoners of a certain models that we had in the past, based on downloads and basing on single experiments, we're not going to have the impact we could.
Okay, so I think the United States of America.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm speaking here as the U.S. principal, not as the co-chair. So, Gilberto, you've mentioned a couple of times here in an earlier presentation about the importance of in situ data in addition to all the satellite data, which we're all more familiar with, but the value of in situ data is a critical part of this collective data, the data collection that is essential for the Earth system observations and understanding. So, and that is the challenge, is getting the various types of in situ data from around the world integrated and available so that we can use them in coordination with a lot of the satellite data. May I ask, what role do you see is there for the Secretariat to help coordinate? You have all the principals here who control most of the data sets, many of the data sets that are of interest, or at least they're in their region. So what role do you see for the Secretariat, and what asks do you have maybe for this community to make those data sets available? Is there, in particular, are there some that are more important than others? Are there assessments that we can make that are, which sets would be most impactful for the successes of the GEO work program activities? Are there starting steps that you see as necessary to lead to the eventual situation where most or all the sets are available? I'm asking for sort of specifics that you might have from the Secretariat position of what you can do with us and what we can do to enable that better, that integrated future.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. There are 2 points here. The first is, what is the in situ data which is most needed? Now, we have to go back to Paris Agreement, SDGs and Sendai. And what we have on all of these are what we would call indicators or variables that we are supposed to help measure or to help assess. So if we look at the landscape for monitoring globally, you would find out that for the programs we have, just to give you an example, you had GEO-GLAM, for example, GFOI, GEO-GLOWS. In each case, the initiative is based on the combination of in-situ data and modeling. So if you take GEO-GLOWS, for example, you need hydrological data from a country to combine with the forecast of precipitation to be able to come up with a certain flood assessment. And if you take GFOI, you need a good data set of forest definitions from all over the globe, or specifically to understand what are people calling a forest, and for GEO-GLAM, what are people calling soybeans, what are samples of soybeans, samples of corn, samples of rice. So this kind of data sets, which are directly linked to the GEO initiatives and flagships, are crucial for us moving forward, because if I have an image but I have no samples of rice, even though I think it is rice, how can I be sure unless I test it? So this is really the in-situ data that we need is directly linked to the activities that we perform. Now, of course, this will be linked to the fact that if one is using, and the motivation to share also comes with a benefit. So one of the problems of asking people to share data, especially in the South, is what's the benefit for them? So if they don't see a benefit for sharing, they would be in a position which takes this as negative. So setting up an environment by which they can use big data, but they are compelled or encouraged to share their in-situ data with others, will make a huge difference. So we have to move in sync. We move making them use the clouds and having them share the data. So it's in one hand a matter of persuasion, but in the other hand a matter of showing the benefits. The benefits are that you are able to do a better job than what you would do if you didn't share. So we have to work with the benefits. The other thing we need, and I'm going to then go back to what your second point, which is to ask, we are looking forward to 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe, sites or institutions which have or will have or can have a commitment to build an in-situ database for GEO. It may be any of you, any of your principals, any of your institutions, or more than one. The commitment is having data archived, curated, and maintained. This is a serious commitment by which you are going to make a difference to the world. So if I may, in the current, you don't need to answer it right now, but obviously in the months to come, as your Secretary Director, one of my jobs is trying to convince some of you. I need to state my gratitude for Germany, because Germany has, made a first step, an important one, by supporting the GEO Secretariat with one in-situ data person. We are very grateful for Germany because Germany has recognized the need for that and has pushed the Secretariat, made the Secretariat more, let's say, with more capacity by funding one person on that. That's the starting point. But the end point is 1 or more, 3 or 4, public, fully curated, fully guaranteed data centers where we can store in-situ data to the GEO community.
Okay. Yes.
Mexico.
Mexico.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Gilberto, for this wonderful presentation. And following up on this discussion, and what our co-chair from the United States just said, I think it's also important to consider how this data is going to comply with certain standards. And we have here our OGC friends and others, and how are we going to make this data interoperable within the same format, homogeneous, or what are your ideas in terms of this? I'm also wondering, I mean, you said put the information in the cloud. Who would pay for that? And I would say in what you called in your presentation the Global South, there might be some information that is still not digitalized. So probably that could be also a challenge. Thank you.
Very difficult questions, Paloma, but thank you for them. So let's take them one by one. The standards and the interoperability. We have to remember that this quest for in situ data is not new. It is not a primer for GEO. If you are on the scientific community has been warming or has been taking this issue of what they call a data paper very seriously, because there have been many recent cases of fake papers, especially in areas which are very sensitive like health. And now, if you go to the journal, one of the most prestigious journals on data called Nature Scientific Data, you have a list of repositories. There are repositories already. Whether these are the ones we need, it's different. And there are repositories for earth and environmental sciences. And what they have done is they have, if you submit your data, one of them, the one I use is again the German one, thanks Germany, the pangea.de. And what you submit, there is a gatekeeper. The gatekeeper being German, you can be assured that Vorsprung durch Technik. You know, you get the person sends you back a lot of questions. Well, this data is not, but they are flexible. In other words, they make sure that what you describe is there. They don't just take it blindly. But they have flexible in the number of formats they accept. So they try to avoid being dragged down on the issues of interoperability to the extent that if you send your data in one open format, which they can read, so it just needs to be sent in one open format. If you send it in one open format, then you can be assured that other people can read the data. It would make it easier then request that it be transformed. So one of the issues is the optimal is not as good as the good, because having the data being deposited in an open format that can be machine readable and human interpretable is better, that's what they have come up to the conclusion, than having a single format which is imposed upon everybody. But again, that's the experience of these Earth. You can look at the Earth's various repositories for Earth and environmental data, which are quite good, and they are reliable, very reliable, curated, and they have commitments for the long term. And I think this is a very good model for us to follow.
Okay. I don't see any hand, and okay, I see that's Finland, and we have allocated 1 hour for this
Thank you.
Discussion, and yeah.
So I want to comment a little bit on the in situ kind of question to just get all in situ into a few places in the world is, I think, not really the reality when you consider that, for example, a very important source of in situ data is in meteorological institutions. We would, when we have 400 stations, which we partly are every 10 seconds taking data from, I'm sure that Pangea would tell us not to put our data on Pangea if we would start to put it there. So I think there's a kind of like, we shouldn't make it too easy for ourselves in some places, that we do have some places, some data sets, some things that just will be falling on the hands of usually governments to take care of and then store for a long time and do something with. And these we also have to make sure are compatibly usable for a full Earth observation system. So I think for that to be progressed, we should make sure that even if, I'm sure that the idea of, for example, DOIs would not necessarily be useful for that kind of like, when do we make a new one for the stations? If we change some parameter in the station, for example, which happens quite often. So in essence, there is some things where we might need something else. They should also still be a part of the Earth observation thing. So, but the principle I fully support, that let's make sure that things are, let's say, that you can connect with them through an HTTP, so a web interface, and it would stay kind of consistently a certain address, because that's not too difficult to put forward even if you move stuff. That is, I think, very good principles, but those principles might be even more important, and it also would relieve us from the kind of, we have to get faster moving some of this. And I'm saying that for certain organizations, it's probably when they have already systems where these stuffs are, it is less, let's say, likely that they start moving it to someone else, when then they might actually put in place a piece of software that they can then be a part of GEO actions. I think that there we should have a two roads at least to the same goal.
But and so can you just take that with Italy? Let's just take it together with Italy.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, not having a technical document available, so it's hard to make a specific technical question, because it's not clear how the proposed, what type of process would follow this repository, geo-centralized repository. But knowing that most of the Insitu data have already their own repository, and most of it are open data, but not only open data. There are repositories that provide you metadata, but not the data. So I think I have two questions. One, what is the added value that you create with your proposal to centralize, to do like a mirror site, lumping together all the existing repository? Then the second point is, we still have unsolved issues related to the data policy. And there are many data sets that are not open. And so what GEO plan to do in order to solve these issues, in order to create added value with this centralized action in a repository of Insitu data? Thank you.
Thank you. So can I, okay, there's two, the question from Nicole and from Miku, they talk about some of the data sets which he is asking about the value. Essentially, what the Miku and Nicola are asking is about the value of storing data which is already stored somewhere. And I think it goes back to the slide I mentioned about two kinds of data sets we have, especially for the space data, and also for Insitu. There are data sets where we measure physical parameters of the planet. So the sea surface temperature is sea surface temperature. Now, deforestation is not a parameter measured by space. Forest is not measured by any sensor. You have signals. So the value of Insitu is much greater. It's not so having a GEO Insitu repository if it would be to store again the data which is stored in WMO data centers for ozone, for Earth radiation budget, or for reanalysis or for observations is zero. That does not add a lot of value. Where it adds value is for the things we talked in these 2 days. We talked about how to fulfill the Paris Agreement. We talked about how to fulfill the SDGs, the disaster monitoring. And a lot of that has to do with how humans perceive space and how they take the information from signals which come out of satellites and, let's say, classify those signals as something: forest, soil, water, drought. All of these concepts are not objective. They're not objective. Drought, desertification is not an objective concept. It depends on how you measure and what are you measuring. So a lot of misconception is that there is no need to store data which is already stored. There is a need to store data which is essential for fulfilling the GEO goals of supporting SDGs, Sendai, and Paris, which is nowhere. Just nowhere. It's not even exists visibly in the world. People go to the field, collect data, and the data is hidden. That data is really hidden. So it's not a question of going through a broker and finding that data. That works for data which, mostly in this case, is data which is provided by, let's say, sensors which measure physical properties. So the important thing is data that is not even brokerable, data which sits on people's desks and which they will contribute if they can see a benefit. Now, as for the issues of data policy, I don't think you can find in Earth anyone that has more committed to open data policy than the current GEO Secretary Director. I showed you yesterday. I don't think you can find anyone with the same trajectory, because there is only one person who opened the data and sat around and fought tooth and nail. I'm very proud of that. And you can guess that I'll continue in my quest. Sometimes I have to do it. You were not here last week, but I had a number of not so nice words to the Asian countries about their data availability. But there's a limit what you can say publicly, but there's a limit what you talk privately. And therefore, I don't think you can get anyone more committed to open data than myself. I don't think. This is I'm very proud of, and this mantle I don't think I'm passing to anyone. So I think from this sense, I will continue, work hard, very hard, to make data available. That you can be sure.
Okay, we'd like to wrap this discussion and continue, but there's one more hand that I want to take, which is Ilta.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We want to draw your attention to a full afternoon side event we had on the Monday, which elaborated on many of these issues concerning in situ and how to progress. And we are convinced, inspired by a very energetic statement by Gilberto in the beginning, who gave us the mandate to do this discussion. There is a lot of quite differentiated material elaborated in this workshop, which was motivated from the question, what does GEO want to achieve? What shall be the role of GEO in the field of in situ observation? And we got to three main sources of in situ information. These are the national regular monitoring schemes, a big amount of more loosely organized observation projects and networks, and more recently the emerging research infrastructures. All those have very different profiles, and it might be wise that GEO develops a strategy with respect to these three main sources and the kind of activities and how GEO wants to place itself, we think, will be very different for these three groups. This could be entirely strategic at the level of the members of GEO. This could be rather servicing for the data sources which produce a huge legacy of data which is at stake to be lost. And as a final point, build on the huge resources of the emerging, more formalized research infrastructures globally, which could give very good examples on how the field can be organized, and they are, I think, also a key pivot for developing services and tools that could be of use for the less organized and formalized sources of in situ information. There will be a report, and we would be keen on learning how to best feed the output of this workshop into the process, which seems to be an important one. Thank you.
Michel, thank you very much. I would like to ask you to send the report to the Secretariat. So I think given the level of importance that the plenary has attached to it, and it's not only in this discussion, we had in the previous discussion also, that was clearly noted. So I would suggest that you perhaps send it as soon as possible to us so we can circulate to the members of the plenary, given the level of importance that this issue has taken. And I think the work of your group is extremely appreciated. And you really have done a great job supporting the Secretariat on this discussion.
Thank you so much, Beto. I think we are going to maintain an open door arrangement. So if there are any other inputs or points that people want to make, you can feel free to get in touch with Gilberto and the rest of the relevant people in the Secretariat as well. Thank you. We are now going to move to the next session, which is GEO Business. And we're going to start with the financial statements and the audit report. And this is going to also include the item on the trust budget as well. Virginia is going to lead that presentation. Yes. So we're going to also do the trust fund budget, and then we're going to make some commitments in terms of pledges.
Okay.
The floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. We'll be covering, maybe save a little bit of time here, items 9.1 and 9.2 on the agenda, which are covered by the Budget Working Group. So on my behalf, and Stuart mentioned, these slides are presented, starting with the first one. Let's see. The issue, where we came into this year on the GEO Trust Fund budget. And this slide shows in Swiss francs the core secretariat budget in yellow there, which is the budget that was determined in accordance with the central task set forth in the strategic plan. And this core functions of the Secretariat, the essential functions, staff, salaries, travel, supplies, telephone, all that is covered in this particular trust fund that is essential for the operations of the Secretariat. In blue, you have the budget that includes the in-kind contributions, which include office space and seconded staff. And the line in green is the cash budget. And the problem that we came into starting with in the 2018 was a decline in the budget that is seen here in 2016 and then again in 2017. So we have discussed this at plenary last year, and then also in the executive committee and amongst the budget working group. And all country principals received a letter with an indicative scale of the contributions that collectively amongst the whole 105 member countries adds up to that $5 million target. It's based on the UN scale that considers primarily GDP. It provides clear guidance for countries on what a fair and equitable contribution would be. Also note that accordance with the rules and procedures that contributions from POs are also welcome. So for transitioning to a fair share, we are encouraging that you might build your contributions into your budget proposals in your individual countries. If you make separate contributions to GEOS, that you might consider the requirements or the needs, actually the needs of the trust fund when you're developing those budgets amongst your countries internally, that you prioritize GEO for any year-end surpluses. You know, a lot of us, you'll have bad lean years, but then in some years you may have some extra, and you could pay, you know, early and or in advance when the money is available. So pay early and pledge early is the plea. So for promoting contributions to identified activities, and this morning we heard several countries commit to different regional activities or very specific initiatives or flagships, but those are always considered above and beyond the core trust fund budget that needs to be covered by the member countries. You can use the above and beyond to provide extra resources for GEO that align strongly with the country interest, and in the budget that's in your 9.2 part of the package for the plenary, you'll have a breakout of how countries have managed to contribute funds for secundees, for example, that align strongly with the country's interest. The good news is, okay, this is the one I showed earlier going through 2017. The good news is that in 2018, as a result of a concerted effort of many countries, the Executive Committee, and the Secretariat, Barb Ryan writing letters to target countries that she thought might be able to help, the trust fund budget went up, and that's the good news. So you might say, well, how did that happen exactly? And looking ahead, can we plan on that in the future? So responsible for the turnaround, we had several new countries since the last plenary. We have the countries listed here that prior to 2000 or end of 2017 and going into 2018 had not contributed. And we also have countries that have increased their contributions substantially. Those countries are listed here, and these are all at or above 100%. And I will point out that in document 9.2, table 3.1, there's a list of all the countries. Some countries are contributing way above what the indicative scale would be. And that's how the trust fund budget has provided for the central resources for the staff and the operations of the Secretariat. So the documents before you for decision today include the budget and a financial audit and statement and audit report, and those are in document 9.1. Just point out that the financial audit is required under the GEO-WMO arrangement and is conducted in accordance with the WMO's financial rules and regulations. And we got a clean bill of health that is before you in the package. We'll note that when the budget declined in 2017 and then again in 2018, that it did eat into the working capital fund, about $500,000 that is set aside for working capital. $294,000 of that was used, and that's after they cut back on travel and even supplies to try to make it through the end of the year. So even though we're flush at the present, it is very important that we maintain the contributions as best we can because of the vagaries of different country budgets. I know in the United States, ours is uncertain from one year to the next. So it's really important that all of us work together to keep the budget healthy so that we can continue to operate the GEO Secretariat. And the timing of the reductions in 2017 was particularly harmful, and the United States was partly responsible for that. It did cause, you're already well into the fiscal year, then you get a reduction in what you had expected, and it caused some changes and reductions in what had been planned for 2017. So in addition to approving the budget, the financial statement and the audit report, we ask for your approval of the 2018 budget. The interim report on income and expenditure is inside of that document, and it does have a budget of 5.25 million Swiss francs for 2019, and the details are in document 9.2. And pledging early and paying early, we've learned the hard way through the evidence shown you today, is really important. So please pledge your contributions now if possible. And with that, if there's any questions, Stuart or Patricia could help me address those. And I do have a table of the indicative scale for 105 member countries. So if you're curious about what the budget would be if you did contribute according to the indicative scale for your country, please see me afterwards, or you can correspond with me or Pat or Stuart, and we'll provide you with that information. Chair, that's all we have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I think it's pretty much more the commitments and pledges that we want now than questions, even though we'll take questions as well. And I think we want to also thank those members who have come forward to contribute, and those who have pledged to increase their contribution. So we really think you've really thrown a serious lifeline to the organization. So we will now, as she said, open for questions, but we also want to see some pledges, noting, of course, that we are going to have to approve the financials and the budget. So I see Mexico.
Just wanted to say that I didn't see Mexico on the list, but I'm for